Your ancestors spent thousands of hours doing absolutely nothing. No phones, no music, no distractions, just silence. And strangely enough, that may be the reason humans became intelligent. Because when the human brain gets bored, it starts creating things. Art, music, religion, civilization itself. But here's a question nobody thinks to ask. What did ancient humans actually do when they were bored? Not medieval humans, not ancient Romans, not even ancient Egyptians. We're going back 200,000 years. Back when there was no writing, no art, no music, no language as we know it. Just people sitting there with nothing to do. For a long time, researchers assumed our earliest ancestors were too busy surviving to get bored. Every waking hour was hunting, foraging, building shelter. There was no downtime. But that assumption turned out to be wrong. Very wrong. In 1966, anthropologist Marshall Salins published research that changed everything. He studied the Kung people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last groups living the original human lifestyle. What he found was shocking. They worked an average of 15 to 20 hours per week. That's it. Not per day, per week. The rest of the time, they rested, they talked, they sat. They did nothing. Salins called them the original affluent society. Not because they had stuff, because they had time. More free time than most modern humans ever get. So, what did ancient humans do with all that time? Let's start with the most obvious answer. They played. It sounds simple, but it's not. In 2010, archaeologists studied shells found at Blombos Cave in South Africa. The shells were 75,000 years old. They had holes drilled through them. They were coated in red ochre. These weren't tools. They weren't weapons. They weren't food. They were beads, jewelry. Someone sat down 75,000 years ago with nothing better to do and made jewelry. That is the oldest known art object in human history, and it started with boredom. Making those beads would have taken hours, maybe days, drilling through a shell with a stone tool. No electricity, no metal, no shortcuts. That is a very long afternoon, and they did it anyway, because the alternative was staring at the wall of a cave. Necessity didn't invent art, boredom did. The same pattern shows up in music. In 2008, researchers found a flute in a cave in southern Germany. It was made from a vulture bone. It had 5 finger holes. It was 40,000 years old. Someone, before agriculture, before cities, before any civilization, invented music. Not because they had to, because they had a free afternoon and a bird bone. It turns out music is what the brain does when it has nothing else to process. Neuroscientist Daniel Levitin argues that musical ability is older than language itself. Our brains were wired for rhythm and melody before we could form complex sentences. Because rhythm is pattern recognition, and pattern recognition kept us alive. Boredom didn't just invent art and music, it invented something far more powerful. It invented imagination. Think about this. You cannot be bored without a concept of time. To be bored, you have to know that this moment is lasting too long, that something else could be happening, that the future exists. Boredom is the first sign that a brain has developed the ability to imagine things that don't exist yet. Animals don't get bored the way humans do. A dog waiting for its owner isn't bored, it's just waiting. It doesn't have a concept of what else it could be doing. But a human sitting in a cave 100,000 years ago, staring at the fire, starts to think, what if the hunt goes wrong tomorrow? What if that sound outside is a predator? What's beyond that mountain? Where do we go when we die? Every question religion has ever asked. Every question philosophy has ever asked. Every question science is still trying to answer. All of them started the same way. Someone was bored, and their mind started wandering. In 2013, psychologist Sandy Mann published research on boredom and creativity. She gave people the most boring task she could think of: copying numbers from a phone book. Then she tested their creativity immediately after. The bored group dramatically outperformed everyone else, because boredom forces the brain to generate its own stimulation. And the brain, when left to its own devices, is extraordinary. But there's one more thing ancient humans did when they were bored, and it's the one that mattered most. They talked. Not about hunting, not about food, not about logistics. They told stories. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent years studying what humans talk about when they're not talking about anything important. His finding: roughly 65% of all human conversation is social gossip. Who did what? Who said what? What happened to someone you both know? This sounds like a waste of time. It wasn't. Dunbar argues that language itself evolved not for practical communication, but for social bonding. Before language, primates bonded by grooming each other physically. But grooming takes time. It's one-to-one. You can only groom one friend at a time. Language replaced grooming. Now you could bond with 3 people at once. 10, a whole group around a fire. You could tell a story about someone who wasn't even there. You could build trust with people you'd never touched. Language didn't emerge because we needed to coordinate hunts. It emerged because we were sitting around with nothing to do and started talking about each other. Boredom invented gossip, and gossip invented society. So here's where we've ended up. 75,000 years ago, someone bored in a cave made a bead. 40,000 years ago, someone bored in a different cave made a flute. And somewhere in between, people sitting around fires with nothing to do started asking questions no one had answers to. Some of those questions became religion. Some of them became science. Some of them became art. Some of them became you. Here's the part nobody talks about. When you eliminate boredom completely, psychologists call it cognitive overload. When every moment is stimulated, the brain never gets to do what it was built to do. Process, consolidate, create. The default mode network, the part of your brain that activates when you're doing nothing, is responsible for creativity, self-reflection, and empathy. It only turns on when you're bored. We spent 300,000 years learning to fill silence with something meaningful. Then we invented the smartphone, and we've been filling silence ever since. But every time you put the phone down and sit with nothing for a moment, every time your mind starts to wander and you let it, the same thing that made the bead, the same thing that made the flute, the same thing that looked up at the stars and started asking why. Boredom didn't hold ancient humans back. It's what made them human. And it might be doing the same thing for you if you let it. If your brain enjoyed this, it means it's working exactly the way it was designed 100,000 years ago. Subscribe, because the next video will make you question everything you think you know about yourself.